for both of us, art has always been like a creative refuge, and we hope that through this film it can inspire people to find more creative refuge.
I am so happy today to be speaking with Asavari Kumar and Shaivalini Kumar, the creative force behind Creatures of Chaos. Thank you so much to you both for the opportunity to chat.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. This film is so charming. It is so you tell a lot of story in 7 minutes or or 6.5 minutes. Where did the idea come from?
Yeah, I can start, and maybe Shai can add on. So we both were sisters, in case you didn't know we were related. We're also like co-writers on this project. So we both grew up in India, and then we moved to different countries. Shai moved to Denmark, I moved to the US for various reasons. And while growing up, we saw our, the sort of like Indian societal point of view on what dealing with mental health looks like. There's a lot of dismissal, there's a lot of silencing. It's sort of equated to weakness. So I think a lot of those attitudes shaped how we decided to deal with mental health. So Shai and I have taken refuge in each other and like had a lot of conversations about mental health. And in the past 5 years, I think we've started to have like more and more conversations. So a couple of years ago, when I started doing pottery and I started teaching in some ways to cope with my own mental health struggles, that sort of led to me kind of thinking about it a little bit more intentionally. And I started to make a lot of creatures that I started calling creatures of chaos, because it was a way for me to like center my chaos and like transform my personal sort of struggles with like depression, anxiety, loneliness into these creatures. And through a lot of pop-up ceramic shops and things like that, I started having conversations with people about these characters. And so Shai and I started talking about maybe it would be cool to make this sort of like a bigger story. Maybe we could do an origin story for these characters, these emotion creatures, where they came from, how they came into being, and how they function in our lives.
I
Yeah.
see them behind you.
Yeah. So the
I
cast.
look behind you. I'm like, wait a second. Uh, it really is something beautifully told. Like I said, there's a lot of story in a few short minutes, and I love this conversation about mental health, like you're talking about. But before we talk about that, I'd love to talk about the unique style. So you created these things, but why tell the story using these visuals? Like the 2D animation is or style has always been one of my favorites. But what was it? What was is just this how you normally sketch, or how did you come with this vision?
I can talk a bit about the style. So we're very versatile in the kind of styles we sometimes use to express things. But originally, when Asa started developing these in clay, we of course started thinking about how can these transform into like a medium which can be best used for film. We were actually thinking of using augmented reality to put these creatures into like actual spaces and make a film in that style. But then we realized that we were letting the spaces dictate the style more than the creatures and the feelings dictate the style. So we made a complete shift. And then we came up with this very textured 2D collage style animation style, which we felt was much more representative of all the feelings that these creatures are embodying. So we actually went through a pretty big process of trial and error, and then we came to the style which we felt fit really well with the story and what we're trying to tell. And then it's sort of like this very rough, rugged rawness in the style is really helping us convey that message.
Yeah, and I want to add to what Shai is saying. So this is not typically an animation pipeline. You start out with something like really pre-edited, and you sort of like follow like a linear path. But we went halfway through production and we had animated characters, and 2D, like Shai said, is sort of like our signature style. But we wanted to sort of like evolve it a little bit, and we felt like it wasn't really telling the story it needed to tell. And so we we decided to make environments for the characters, which is very challenging. So we kind of flipped it halfway, which I will never recommend someone doing, but it ended up being worthwhile, because I think the messiness of the process in some way reflects, how we sort of cope with emotions in our life. So in a meta way, it became very like the medium became very purposeful to like the story that we were trying to tell.
Well, and of course, in the midst of this, you have I want to call them the creatures.
Mhm.
Um, they're and I was wondering about, you know, how or what was it the process you went through in creating them? I know you said you had them in initially, but you get such emotion out of these emotional creatures, if you will. And what challenges were there in emoting or getting emotions out of them?
I think I would put a lot of the sort of like credit on getting these creatures to life on our designer, our character designer, Lissette Diaz, and our animator, Catherine Dallimore. So we kind of created these guidelines like, okay, these are the creatures, this is how clay moves, it's sort of wobbly, squishy, malleable, changes form, and the way emotions sort of get bigger and smaller depending on how you're coping with them or how you're choosing to hide them or repress them. So we created sort of like Shai, as the art director, also like created this sort of visual framework within which they could operate, and then our designer sort of brought them to life by seeking inspiration in the way that clay moves and how emotions feel, and we allowed them to really like dig deep and decide like how would this move if this was like what depression is, and how would this move if this was anxious, how would this move if this was loneliness, and what would this look like if it was fearful. So even though we don't have like specific names or specific emotions allocated to any of these characters, because we wanted to leave space open for the audience to sort of project their own experiences onto that, we did have to tether them to something while we were creating these characters. And then the animator, Catherine, she does a really great job with these like sort of blobby stretch and squash animations. So she really went ham on those, and she made everything like really bendy, squishy, sort of like defying the laws of physics at times. And really, I think that approach brought them to life.
Um, I love the fact that you say you don't necessarily tie one emotion to them, to quite frankly, because I think instinctively that's what we're looking for. Oh, is blue sadness? Oh no, orange. What is orange? All these things. But you just get the sense that these characters are carrying them with them, all of them in their complexity
Mm.
at all times. And I guess the question I thought of is, what do you think it means to, and how do we do a better job of taking care of our emotional creatures, if you will?
I think like a big learning for us also during making this film was just the more you make yourself vulnerable, I think vulnerability is the key, and acceptance and community. I think when these pieces sort of come together, you're doing a better job of taking care of your own emotional creatures. The idea was to get people to see themselves
Mm.
in these characters, and we made characters from different walks of life to represent as big a population as we could. But I think talking about it, putting it out there, not suppressing it, I think goes a very long way. And that's why when the animator, she was working with how these characters move, they have like a really heavy physical weight on them, and it gets lighter the more they share, the more dialogue or unsaid dialogue, because the film has no dialogue happening between, the more interactions, the smaller they get. And I think that's just what we also need to apply to ourselves in real life.
Yeah, I mean that's actually a really great question, because through the process of making this film, we also uh kind of like put a spotlight on our own sort of core care practices. And if even if we think about it historically, like at this moment in time, we have like global wealth inequality at gilded age levels, political systems are under immense strain, there's generational economic decline, particularly for millennials and Gen Z, climate anxiety is intensifying, and because of all of this, mental health struggles are at historic highs, right? But if you look at any sort of like low point in the history, whether you look at it several centuries ago or if you look at it a couple of decades ago, survival is always dependent on community and, like Shai said, vulnerability and to a large extent creative expression, right? And so creative creatures of chaos also tries to like honor that tradition. Whether you have a small creative practice, it can really just be for yourself. And so for both of us, art has always been like a creative refuge, and we hope that through this film it can inspire people to find more creative refuge, even if it's not something that you show for other people, and like build communities of care around that, around those vulnerability moments of vulnerability and creative expression.
It's interesting. Just thinking about this short and thinking about what you're saying there. I know for my son, who's only 10, um, you know, he was struggling to deal with or share his emotions. He's so young; he doesn't, didn't have the words when he was doing it. About 4 years ago, we got him in 3, 4 years ago. We got him into improv,
Mm.
and that's been a creative expression for him. It's helped him find words. You know what I mean? Because that's what improv is. And so I hear what you're saying, because there's an outlet, there's an opportunity to, how do I share? Like you
Right.
said, even if it's just you. And I think we see in this film too that there's the weight of shame. I have to bury
Yeah.
it in my coat,
Mhm.
and keep it away. And I wondered if how whether you or how you felt about that idea of shame being a barrier to creative expression.
Yeah, I mean, we also come from a culture where, we were both expected to be women in STEM, which we're clearly not. But we always found a lot of joy and respite in creative expression. And till date, I feel like there are cultures that talk more openly about mental health. Cultures, a lot of immigrant cultures actually have a lot of shame and stigma attached to mental health conversation
Mm.
because it's equated with weakness or you not being able to take care of yourself. It's never given the same weight as physical wellness. Mental wellness is never given the same weight. So there is definitely a lot of shame and stigma attached to it. And so part of what this film tries to explore is to show that visually and
Mhm.
show the difference that happens and the lightness that happens when you begin to share, just by the simple fact of acknowledging that it exists, that you do have challenges. That itself is a huge weight that automatically destigmatizes it. And then seeing that other people are experiencing something very similar, vulnerability sort of like creates space for other folks to offer their own vulnerability, right? So it's sort of like it creates a space for those things to happen. So we hope that this film kind of reinforces how important that is. Just acknowledgement and feeling seen is so important in removing the shame and stigma associated with it.
I love that. And like I said, this is only a short film of 6 to 7 minutes. There's a lot there to unpack, and I think that's why it works. That's why it works. This isn't just a cute film. There's real meaning behind it, and honestly, I appreciate the chance to chat with you both. Um, Creatures of Chaos is an absolute joy. I really appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye bye.